This is Epic Web3 Podcast. I'm Alex. I'm your host today. We're here today with Kenny from Manta, and my co-host, as always, is Andy from the Rollup. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey.
It's going well. Happy Chinese New Year, Year of the Dragon, Bitcoin, new yearly highs as we speak. I mean, happy Friday. Come on.
Happy Friday indeed.
Yeah, so let's start with your TVL. Because I just looked through L2 Beat and saw that you are in the third place right after Arbitrum and Optimism. Then I looked through Twitter, and some guys are writing that that's just because there is no way to bridge tokens back from Manta to Ethereum. So what are your thoughts on it? Can you say something about it?
Yeah, sure. So just to be clear, right, there of course are ways to bridge from the L2 back to Ethereum, but specifically, I think what they're referring to is the new paradigm campaign, because out of that 1.7 billion, around 800 million of that comes from assets either in USDC or ETH. Coming from the new paradigm campaign. So the new paradigm campaign is a campaign that we ran for approximately, I think, 3-4 weeks over the course of December and part of January. And in that process, in that time, we were able to collectively absorb around 800 million in TVL. And as part of this event, right, that TVL is now in the form of yield-bearing assets, either as or as wrapped USDM. And as part of that, also, users are able to use those assets on Manta Pacific, but there is a 69-day wait period in order to withdraw. And so that wait period is up on March 26th.
Okay, so what are your further expectations about TVL? Will it continue to grow? Will it be some corrections? I don't know.
I mean, I hope it continues to grow, right? I mean, that's the hope, and so that's one of the things that we definitely want to focus on is the continuous growth of the network, and I think that with this tremendous influx of TVL in such a short period of time. The priority for this quarter is actually to make sure that this TVL, which currently half of it sits on the infrastructure layer and half of it is in people's wallet addresses, right? So it's not fully being utilized on the L2. And then the other half of it is actually being utilized in various applications on the L2, primarily on the DeFi side. And so, for Q1, one of the things that we're working closely with our ecosystem applications on is to actually drive more awareness of all the different services, products, campaigns that are going with these ecosystem products, with the goal of helping them increase their exposure to the audience and help also transition some of that TVL from the infrastructure layer to the application layer.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would have thought that TVL of 1.8 was more like 70%. So that's actually pretty bullish. What do you think about this new paradigm? No pun intended. Of like Blast and like Mode kind of did a similar thing. Manta kind of pioneered this in a sense. Like I think Mode's doing like rebasing tokens. Blast doing rebasing tokens. I think Mode's doing something similar. You guys obviously had your shtick, like this native yield bearing L2s. Like, yeah, I'm just curious of like, what is this about? What's your thoughts on it? How degen can this get?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely in an early adopter stage, right? Like Blast was the first to come out with this idea. We thought that the idea was really amazing because a lot of, we can kind of get into it later, but a lot of our approach and our focus has always been around, what can we do to improve the user experience? And that's exactly why we're also leveraging Celestia. But anyway, on the native yield bearing side, right? Like that's pretty natural, self-explanatory incentive there, right, for the users so that they can still continue to have the same user experience that they normally do on an L2, but with this added benefit of having that underlying yield through the assets they're depositing in through the L1. And so I'm really actually very excited to see, like us, Blast, Mode, actually sort of pushing the industry in thinking in more of this perspective. I know it's a very novel idea, and I know especially because of its novelty, it is also highly controversial. But at the same time, right, like these are yield products with underlying trust assumptions that are essentially what you would assume here to be a risk-free rate, right? Just like, in traditional finance, the risk-free rate is the US Treasury bills. In crypto, especially if you're on EVM, the risk-free rate is assumed to be Ethereum staking, right? And so that 4% yield can then actually be passed on to the users as they're continuing to use the L2 in a liquid manner. And it's the same with USDC stablecoins as well, because we're using Mountain Protocol, which is a protocol that leverages US Treasury bills to earn 5% yield for the underlying stablecoin assets, and it also is backed one-to-one with USDC. Um, and so I think like being able to actually take advantage of real world assets, being able to take advantage of this quote unquote Ethereum based risk free rate is something that is I think very powerful. It's almost like with your checking account, right? Instead of having to put all of your money in savings in order to earn the yield, right? In essence, L1 staking. Now you're actually able to keep your money in your checking account and still earn that interest.
Yeah, I remember in DeFi summer, I was always thinking like, man, it'd be really cool if we just switch to staked ETH as the settlement layer for all transactions. Like, why do we even need ETH? Like, we might as well just use staked ETH. But then there'll
Have
always
your
be this
time.
little cohort of people. Yeah, exactly. There'll always be like this small cohort of people, I think, or even perhaps, a bit larger than small for lack of a better term, who just stick to ETH because it's like, you know what, this is what we want. We're ETH like security maxis. And so, but I think we'll really start to see more people lean into this concept. And perhaps in a future world, if you're not launching your roll up with native yield baked in, then you're like not part of like the normal, crew or something.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I don't know, but like, I think it's also thinking about the same reasoning behind Celestia, or the same pattern of reasoning behind Celestia, right? Like, I mean, we are the first L2 to leverage Celestia, and I think we might be one of the only L2s that are general L2s that are leveraging Celestia at the moment, right? And I know that the idea of modular data availability is still fairly novel. We do see other projects starting to come out with this, right? Like such as Eigenlayer, such as Avail, right? And but it's still a very novel idea. But at the same time, right? Like with the benefits being so clear, it's pretty clear to us that like it was the right choice here, because over the past 30 days of deployment, right? It's been about 30 days since we've migrated over to Celestia. In that 30 days, we've saved our users $1.5 million in gas fees. Right, that's almost like $20 million per year in gas fee savings, and so it's pretty awesome, I think, especially when you're thinking about it from a user experience perspective.
Yeah, it is. I wanted to ask also about this TVL metric. So do you think that it's a good metric to showing the success of layer two or any other blockchain? What other metrics should we look at?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of many metrics, right? Like, I don't think there's any one singular measurement that dictates whether or not, an L2 is amazing or not. At the end of the day, right, like, it is a metric that we have seen being standardized, fairly standardized, right? I mean, L2 beat ranks L2s by their TVL, right? That's their default ranking. So, that's just one of the metrics. And so it's one thing that we look at, right? Like, definitely another distinguishment we make here is the utilized TVL, right? Because I guess I mentioned it near the beginning, where it's like, a lot of it is on the wallet address side, which we consider the infrastructure side, and we want to transition that over to the application side so that we have a larger amount of utilized TVL on the L2. Yeah, and then overall, just like on-chain wallet addresses, on-chain activities, right? Just being able to kind of measure that, I think, is a fairly strong indicator of like network health.
Yeah, I think like wallet activity over time as well. Um, is a good one. But so on the kind of moving from the infra and kind of launch convo into the here and now. So you guys have saved $1.5 million in a month. I was talking to Avo, Julian, and I think they saved $1 million on their app chain from using Celestia. That money just goes back into the users' pockets, basically, from not having to spend it on gas,
Yeah.
which then is basically more money in the Manta ecosystem, DeFi liquidity, LP positions, DEXs, lending markets. Like you can think of this as like almost like you're opening up a whole new stream of more liquidity for your
Exactly. Yeah,
which
and
yeah.
there's two pieces of this, and I think you hit the nail on the head on that first part. And the second part is, when you remove that sort of financial barrier for every transaction, you're encouraging and enabling additional transactions on chain, right? I mean, it's a very simple example of this is just when Ethereum gets extremely congested, and now all of a sudden it costs $200 to make a swap, right? I don't know if you guys are going to make a $200 swap, but it's very unlikely that I would, right? And I know it's an extreme example, but I think it just shows that sort of pattern of behavior based on, financial barriers in Web3.
Yeah, the guys on Blockworks call it anti-network effects, where all these blockchains today, and this is kind of what we're trying to solve with this modular stack. It was like we're trying to make block space much more abundant and much less scarce. And basically, when what you just explained is like the opposite of the desired outcome that builders should have, because like a funny example is like social media. It's like if you get a bunch of retweets and likes and boosts, it's not like your post gets more expensive or like harder to retweet by somebody else. It actually starts to work in your favor and goes into more and more people's like feeds, if you will. Whereas in blockchains, if you get a very popular application that gets a bunch of traction and a bunch of people are trying to use it, it gets more expensive and congests the chain to then use it, which disincentivizes further usage. Do you think modular DA is a big way to kind of solve for this in the role landscape?
Yeah, I think modular DA or native DA all have its place in the blockchain space. Right, for example, Ethereum is still in the process of looking through and hopefully eventually transitioning through EIP 4844, right, proto dank sharding, and I think that's going to bring a lot of financial benefits to the users on the native DA side. And this is something that we think is extremely complementary to what we're doing with Celestia, because actually we have Ethereum fallback, which means that if Celestia actually stops responding for our network for one reason or another, right, we can fall back to Ethereum. If we did that today, that would mean the gas fees would be increased quite significantly. But in the future, with proto-dank sharding, right, like that transition between the two can be pretty seamless, and I think that that's something that we're definitely looking forward to. Yeah.
Nice.
Let's talk about Manta itself a little bit. So
Sure.
first of all, you have two networks, right? Manta Pacific and Manta Atlantic. One is L2, another is L1 in Polkadot. So is it just the legacy, or do you really need two networks, two different networks, and why?
Yeah, really good question. So, Manta Atlantic was the network that we started building approximately 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago now, and it is still the fastest ZK L1 on the market today. And one of the reasons why we wanted to expand to the L2 was because a lot of the circuits that we built, a lot of the ZK circuits that we built for the L1, we realized that without this Turing completeness, without a VM environment, it meant that developers couldn't take advantage of them to be customizable in their own application environments, right? So as an app developer, maybe I want to use components of all these ZK circuits that Manta has built out, but I can't access that directly through a UTXO based L1 with no VM. And so we wanted to bring this to the developer level. And so we wanted to see where all the developers are, and obviously they're all on Ethereum. And so being able to launch that L2 with Pacific, Manta Pacific, we're able to expose all of those circuits to the actual developers. I think we are still very early in the ZK game, especially on the application side, right? Like when people think about ZK these days, it's primarily on rollups. But I do think that like when you're thinking about next generation applications, decentralized applications, then this ingredient of ZK is inevitable. And we can get into examples of that, but I think that's sort of just to kind of give you a history of Atlantic and Pacific. But I think the other part of your question was about distinguishing between the two and if they're both really necessary. So Atlantic right now is focused primarily on-chain identity. In fact, private verifiable on-chain identity is something that Atlantic has always been focused on, and it has over 100,000 KYC users that can verify their on-chain KYC, specifically on the L1, right? And so that's been happening for the past, I don't know, since the previous 1 year or so. I think that is great for that particular use case, and we do see a world where we can integrate that privacy-preserving on-chain identity with the applications within Manta Pacific. Whether that's two separate chains to continue to do that, or we find some cohesiveness between them, right? I think we're open to both options. At the moment, right, the on-chain identities are all on the L1, and the applications are all on the L2.
What are the other use cases of ZK you are mostly bullish on? I mean, for example, ZK ML is quite a narrative right now. ZK KYC, as you mentioned. What else?
Yeah, I think that when people think about ZK, right? There's two components of, or there's two categories that ZK kind of falls under, right? And one is privacy, and the other one is verifiability, and they're kind of one and the same, but not really. And so when you're thinking about like ZKML, when you're thinking about ZK rollups, those I think fall under the category of verifiability, right? What you're really trying to do is verify something. You're verifying that the model that you're using is the actual model that ran the query on the ML side. You're verifying that the transactions in the rollup are actually the transactions in the rollup, right? But on the privacy side, there's a whole other world of use cases that I think many are pretty self-explanatory. I think for better or for worse, right? At least in the media, right, there has been a lot of coverage of Tornado Cash in the past year or so, right? And so private on-chain transacting is, I think, very important in this space, especially when you start really trying to think about how you scale to this quote unquote 1 billion users, right? Like imagine 1 billion users using blockchain and there's absolutely no privacy and everyone can see everyone's stuff, right? Like that's unsustainable. There's a reason why I bet you guys also have many different wallet addresses, right? It's probably because you're trying to fragment your identity so that you don't, have to reveal to everyone that like, you're someone, you have all these other assets, right? Like every time I go and verify my pudgies, right? Like even on the Discord community, I move my pudgies into different wallets so that people don't see like which ones, what else I have and everything, right? So like we're taking these extra steps because we do want that privacy. So I think that element is inevitable. But on the privacy side, I think something really interesting occurs as well, because privacy is not just necessarily about user transacting. And we also talked about identity as well. But one of the emerging use cases we see is also around gaming. And so one of the games that are deployed on us is called ZK Hold'em. ZK Hold'em is the only fully on-chain Texas Hold'em game. And the way that they're actually doing that is using ZK and homomorphic encryption. If you think about it, right, with a chess game, it's fully transparent. You can see the state of the game on the blockchain, and that's perfectly fine. But if we were playing poker and someone were to want to cheat, all they have to do is look on the blockchain to see the state of the game, and they see everyone's cards, right? So inevitably, you need that element of ZK as well as homomorphic encryption in order to build something that can actually verify without revealing any of the cards on chain. And so, ZK Hold'em is the only instantiation of that on in Web3 currently, and they use ZK and homomorphic encryption deployed on us in order to make that happen.
Yeah, it's like know that you won the hand, and even if your opponent mucks their cards, backed by validity proofs. Poker stars could never, bro. They are coping so hard right now.
Is there something going
Get
on with you on
rugged.
Discord?
No, I'm just messing
Okay.
around. How like you can't trust the traditional gambling sites. Of course it's 99% that they are all legitimate, but with ZK, if you can cross that barrier in people's minds between like verify but don't know or don't need to know, in a private manner is like, yeah, that's
Yeah, I
a
think
yeah.
poker is like poker is a game for mathematicians, and now it's being built on chain by mathematicians, so it's pretty cool.
Do you think that ZK as a technology is ready to build more dApps to have more use cases, or we still need to go a long way to
I
develop it?
think so. I think we're getting there. And it's really exciting. But, as an industry, I don't think it's picked up much steam yet. I think we're still in the generation of application forks, right? When choosing between creating the Uniswap of chain XYZ versus creating, a ZK Hold'em or something, I think most projects still go for creating that Uniswap because it's a proven business model, right? And it works, and there's definitely demand for it. And so it's not a knock towards any project at all, right? I think that there's still that requirement to have these types of foundational applications in Web3. But I do think that we're getting there. And, like as cliche as it sounds, I think it is a combination of a lot of the research put into ZK to improve and make more efficient the generation speed, combined with technologies like Celestia and proto dank sharding in the future, right? When ZK Hold'em first deployed on Manta, without Celestia, and a game of ZK Hold'em cost around $15 to $20 in gas fees. Right now, with Celestia, a game of ZK Hold'em can be played for $1 or less. And so I think that indicates like we're starting to break through into this next generation of scalability. And like that's always been kind of one of the bottlenecks in at least deploying ZK on the application layer for like decentralized applications.
So
Yeah.
every infra founder I speak to says that infrastructure is like almost ready to bring, if not a billion, but 100 million users. Why do you think we're not still not there? So what
We
do
are
we need to
not.
do?
I will be one of the few infrastructure people to tell you that we're far from being able to bring a billion users to Web3. Like
Okay, okay.
that's okay. So here's a very simple data point. Like inscriptions. Didn't you guys see like the wave of inscription craze going across L2s, and then all of a sudden every single L2 got shut down and their sequencers stopped working and stopped producing blocks? Like I think that's already an indication that we can't sustain a billion users. We can't even sustain an inscription project, right? Like so there's there's definitely still, I think, a long way to go in scalability end. And I do think that the final state, in order to actually sustain that 1 billion users, is not going to be accomplished by any singular L2. And in fact, I think that if we do get a billion users across the current architectural landscape of L2s and even L1s, then it's going to be such a terrible experience for everyone because you have so much fragmentation. You have fragmentation of identities, you have fragmentation of liquidity, you have fragmentation of applications. And so it's a billion users are just going to be very angry, right? Like it's not the Visa like experience that we were all hoping for, right? It's just like you now have all these parallel universes of the same apps, kind of, but not really, because they have different amounts of liquidity. And one is represented by, a shark, and the other one's represented by a dog. And you're just like, it's this parallel universe of all these different single applications that give slightly different but the same user experience. And so even on a user experience product level, I don't think we're there. And so, in that state, right, what does a 1 billion user state really look like? I think that's a state where you have to have some type of aggregation, you have to have some sort of synchronization between the L2s, and you're not thinking about L2s as like one singular computer that runs all the applications, but rather L2s as a network of computers that you can scale out horizontally, right? So, you hear Celestia talking about, I don't know, whether it's 1,000 or 1 million rollups, and you hear Polygon talking about the same thing, right? But like, I don't think their point is that there's going to be a million Mantas, each with their own, Uniswap. I think their point is that the scalability, horizontally scaling out the L2s and then abstracting the L2s and allowing the applications to load balance across various L2s is going to be that user experience that brings that 1 billion users. But I do think that we're still fairly far from that state.
Yeah, we had Jasper from SETA on, talked a lot about chain abstraction. I know Near's founder, Ilya, is like going balls deep into that. He had a really good podcast on empires. And so I think this idea of like shared sequencing or shared prover networks or just super ultra fast bridges with dApps having native chain abstraction and then figuring out all the info on the back end for like data passing, bridging, and sequencing or proving across different app specific and general purpose rollups, scaling that, figuring that out. Maybe it takes another 18 months, but I'm pretty bullish on the speed of execution. Like I wouldn't be surprised if we're like halfway there by the end of the year, and then sometime next year, like some of that dreaminess of like say goodbye to bridging on like some bridge. I wouldn't be surprised if 2025 kind of kicks that off.
That'd be exciting. Yeah. I mean, this is the state that I've always wanted. I think that, coming from the cloud computing space, this is the exact architecture that cloud computing takes, right? It's all about horizontal scalability. It's all about synchronizing the servers in order to serve users the applications.
Speaking of serving users, a little bit off of a different tangent here. Is the new paradigm? Was that the only like retroactive rewards for users, or are there planned different events in the future for incentives? Or the word incentive is a little shaky. Are there planned stages, or is this a one-time thing? I know we've had an incentive problem in the past, so I'm gonna try to throw that one out there.
Sure, yeah. So, like, it's definitely something that's top of mind. Like I said before, right, like our priority in Q1 is to migrate TVL simply from the infrastructure level to the application level. And in that perspective, right, we are talking with projects, and a lot of these projects are very interested in helping us achieve that goal. And so I think that there are going to be some additional sort of campaigns that are going to be centered around that specific goal.
And this is a community question, so don't flame me. The community is wondering why TIA stakers weren't included in the original campaign.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the airdrop campaign actually included TIA holders. So these were all people that bridged their TIA from Celestia over to Manta, right? So it was the TIA holders that actually got a segment of the airdrop, not the stakers themselves. Because yeah, right now actually, Manta is also paying the majority of the fees for all the stakers on Celestia as well. But yeah, just to clarify there, right? Like the TIA token holders that bridged over and helped supply liquidity on Manta Network got a portion of the tokens.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not going to push too hard. That the community would kill me if I didn't ask this question when I have Kenny live.
Sure.
Yeah, I wanna ask about airdrop from the founder's perspective, from a builder's perspective. So, uh, looks like 90% of, or maybe 99% of activity in crypto is now kind of incentivized, mostly with airdrops, points, and whatever. So from one side, it's okay. I mean, we are in this stage, but from the other side, there is some problem with that. So, uh, what do you think? Where do we need to go from here? So, when will we see users who are here not just for money, maybe for something else?
That's a really good question. I think that we are still in a generation of um, what do you? So we're still in a generation of DeFi products or dApps with a different skin, but it's still a DeFi product. I think, like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, right? Like, but can you guys tell me an application that people are actually using that is sustainable over the past even 4 or 5 months, maybe 1 year, where people are using it purely because of the value proposition of the app that's not related to
Farcaster.
anything DeFi? Okay, but Farcaster really
Farcaster.
just exploded in the past 3 days, right?
Well,
That
you
app
asked,
is,
sir.
but
I just
what's the
answered
sustainable, right? Like it's the same thing with what do you call it?
with friend tech.
Friend Tech, and even before Friend Tech, there was like Mastodon, and even before Mastodon, there was like the bit the A16Z one that was
Yeah,
and then even before that there was Steam It, right? And all of these like social applications that
over
had their moment
financialized.
in the sun, but then kind of faded out. Also, because there are financial components to it, right? I mean, people are trading keys on Friendtech. People are anticipating airdrops on Friendtech. People are not, at least not to my knowledge, using Friendtech on a daily basis because they love Friendtech, right? Like, no offense to Friendtech, it was definitely an amazing social experiment, but at the same time, right? Like, we are still not at a point where we have true products for the purpose of that existing value proposition. I think we're very close to it, and I think that we can achieve that in the next 6 months, in the next year. And I think once we do achieve that, then we're going to be transitioning out of a state where users are simply looking for all of these DeFi related activities, and more so thinking about how these applications improve their daily lives. But at this point, right, like, what is your daily life? Your daily life is on your mobile phone, right? It's on your iPhone. But how many of these applications even work on your iPhone without having to switch between two apps, right? Like, I switch from an app to my wallet, and sometimes the wallet picks up the signature that I need to sign. Sometimes it doesn't. So I have to go back to the app again, click it again, and then go back to the wallet and then do it again, right? Like, there's just a lot of user experience friction that, and I guess the incentives aren't entirely aligned to drive real users for real value on a lot of, I think, applications that exist today. But I do see that there is a lot of promise in terms of some of the emerging applications that could potentially kind of shift that mindset.
I agree. I was going to take that in an optimistic route if you were going to end as a Mr. Doomsdayer. So I'm glad because I'm bullish on the state of gaming for 24, 25 real games. I think there's a chance we get one or two big hits from Immutable or from Alluvium or from Paima Studio, social ones. I wanted to pin down a little bit more. This one may be an interesting one for you, and we can take this in a couple different ways. But I'm curious, like perhaps, I guess, like, what are your thoughts with regards to, and this kind of goes with what Alex saying, like airdrop distribution mechanics, and kind of like some of these new metas, like Pudgy Penguin drops, Tia Stakers. If you did this test net or this galaxy, or like I guess reflecting back on new paradigm, what do you think that you guys did really well and that other teams can learn from? And then perhaps what could you have improved a bit and that other teams could also, kind of learn from?
Sure. So to be clear, right, like New Paradigm was not our airdrop. New Paradigm was a separate campaign
So,
that had like, but we did have an airdrop as well. And so collectively between New Paradigm and the airdrop, that was a total of 10% on top of like, all the other incentives and everything. I think collectively, the amount that was distributed to the community at TGE was around like 15, 16%. But that being said, right, like, I guess there's two components here. One is the airdrop component, and one is the new paradigm component, because they're both 5%, and there's both, I think, areas that we did well, and other areas that we should have considered more. And I'll start with new paradigm. New paradigm was quite an interesting experience because we set aside 5% of the entire token supply for this event, right? Which is quite a chunky amount of token supply in a very short period of time, right? If you recall, the event took place for a period of, I think, 4 weeks. And so in a 4 week period, right, like people were getting that 5% allocation. And so I think that one thing that we could have done better here is, we couldn't even anticipate the success of New Paradigm, right? Like when we were thinking internally, we're like, oh, this is going to be a cool campaign. It's going to introduce people to yield bearing products, right? People have never even heard of Mountain, but Mountain is such a cool RWA idea that just doesn't exist in other places today, right? Because USDT doesn't give you yield. USDC doesn't give you yield, but Mountain Protocol uses US Treasury bills, which is the risk-free rate of the world, which is really cool. And so setting aside, 5% would have been amazing if we had gotten the anticipated traction and, gotten about like an additional maybe, I don't know, 200 million in TVL. But then it exploded, like went way beyond expectations, right? And so all of a sudden, right, like thinking about the reward system and stuff, it became a lot more restraining in terms of what we could do with regards to like the token supply and everything. And so I think like thinking about the future, right, like I think for future projects that are thinking about these types of campaigns, right, having scenario planning for various different scenarios and making sure that all these sort of systems are considered is extremely important. And then on the airdrop side as well, right? Like on the airdrop side, this is a problem that I think most L2s face. In fact, all L2s face. Um, who are the real users, right? And I think that's exactly why people have been, or projects have been airdropping to pudgies. They've been airdropping to TIA stakers. They've been airdropping, right? Because at the end of the day, right, like I do think that there is an art in order to discover real users. I think that even more tricky, even trickier, is discovering real loyal users, right? Like for Manta, we had people that have been with us for 3 years, building and testing alongside us for 3 years. And like, there's been a lot of ups and downs. There's been a lot of moments where people thought Manta was not going to make it. And, there would be moments where, communities would just entirely leave. But, a lot of people really stuck around for the entire process, right? And so being able to identify those people and show them how much we value that commitment and all that support and all of the continued feedback throughout those 3 years was top priority. And then beyond that, right, being able to kind of create that spectrum where the intersection of real users and loyal users kind of combine, right? That I think that's definitely a process that a lot of projects have to face and come to an ultimate decision. But for us, it was fairly unique because I think the timeline between our project launch and the mainnet launch and then the subsequent token launch was 3 years, which is not sort of normal for a lot of projects in this space. And so when it comes to user loyalty, right, like that's definitely something that we prioritize a magnitude more differently than I think normally. Yeah.
But I think you guys did a killer job of like rewarding those on like Galaxy and like those OG users. I think they ended up doing a little bit better perhaps than like small people who just bridged over during Paradigm or kind of just trying to jump on the hype in a sense. But then also those people that like New Paradigm also gave the community something to like rally around and like make noise about and like referral codes and kind of like getting your friends involved about this new modular L2. So I think like on the messaging and marketing front, it's good. And yeah, it's funny, man. Like from a protocol perspective, you've got 8 to 10% of supply
Sorry.
to drop, and then you've got your team that's been working for 3 years, and what are you going to do? Just give away supply to some randos on the internet who farmed your airdrop like 8 times and did 8 transactions on chain over 3 years? And like here's your devs working tirelessly 12 hours a day. Their tokens are locked still for a while, and they're like, dude, come on, So it's an interesting distribution mechanism.
Yeah, thanks, Andy.
Sure.
Appreciate it. And I think like one of the notes here is like, definitely kudos to the team, right? Like the past 3 years have not been easy. Like we've sacrificed Christmases, we've sacrificed, national holidays from, people in their local communities. It's all been a really, really concerted and full-hearted effort in order to make this all happen. And so like it's definitely not been an easy ride, and it's really only the beginning, right? And so like I think like couldn't have asked for a better team either. So
Nice. Uh, one maybe last question. So, are you going to Denver yourself, right?
yeah, yeah.
What are your plans there? So, I mean, I saw you're gonna be at ZK Day Denver. What else?
Yep. So ZK Day is, an event that we host alongside Cointelegraph, and this time with Amazon AWS as well. And it's normally a very packed day, and so really excited to host it again. Other than that, right, like definitely lots of sort of speaking sessions, panel sessions, and I myself will just be there meeting with a lot of ecosystem projects, a lot of potential ecosystem projects, and just kind of chatting to people and answering any questions they may have about Manta.
Nice, nice. For those listeners who made it to the end, don't forget to come to our epic ETH Infra Day in
Woo.
Denver on the 1st of March. We'll be happy to see you there as well. Kenny, the Roll Up is our general media partner, and you will be emceeing there. So,
Nice.
yeah, hope to see you in Denver as well. And thank you for the pod. It was great talking to you, and wish your
Thanks for having me.
TVL skyrockets even further.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Kenny.
appreciate all the support.